Dear Jesus, we thank you for this morning. We ask for your blessing and for your guidance, especially as we dive into your word here in the book of Ecclesiastes. We ask also, Lord, that we can have fun and we can be able to fellowship and ask some really good questions. And all this we pray, amen. All right, so Dwight, go ahead and hit C6 and tilt up a little bit. There we go on the joystick there. Let's see if that works. Hold on, because my head's cut off just a little bit. Alternatively, I could squat just a little bit, but I feel like that would not be as good. So I have it on just a little bit on the speakers in here. If you want, I could turn it up just a little bit. Let's check this out. So if I hit this button. All right, Dwight, you good there? Hit C6 and then tilt up just a little bit. Because I tell you what, I do not want to squat today. That would be very unpleasant. All right. All right. Dwight, you got some issues there? What's that?
It's not moving with the joystick.
Oh, yeah, power cycle it. That sounds good. All right, cool. Yeah, go ahead and do that. All right. So with this, here you go. Check, check. Is this a little bit better in here? Almost? A little bit? There we go. All right, cool. That's a little bit better. All righty then. So let's go ahead and get right into Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 1 here. And so here's what it says. It says, the subtitle for this is Death Comes to All. All right, so you guys thought that we're going to get into the warm fuzzies today? We are. We're going to be talking about death. And in fact, that is actually one of the things that I do like about the book of Ecclesiastes, because I think Pastor Mike had mentioned this to you guys a couple weeks ago, but it was written there at the end of Solomon's life. And so Solomon, so he starts off his kingship, and in the first one that he writes is Song of Solomon, and so he is madly in love. And then we go from there to him writing Proverbs, and there he contrasts the wise with the fool. So he keeps saying, I pity the fool who does not follow God. And then we end up with Ecclesiastes, and the very first verse in Ecclesiastes is, it's all vain, it's all smoke and mirrors, none of it really matters. And then you say to yourself, wow, that's really depressing. And it kind of is, except that it isn't if you continue in the book of Ecclesiastes, which is where we're going to be today, that not all is for nothing, not all is vain, but rather that there is some meaning, but that meaning is only found in God. I should also mention that, of course, if you're here in person, raise your hand, and we'll have a discussion on things. There's going to be some things we talk about that you're going to want to ask questions on. But also for those of you who are online, we do have the phone number there at the bottom. You can text questions, and I do have an iPad. And humor me, just send in some text, all right? Try to stump me, and so we'll do that. All right, so verse 1 out of chapter 9 says this. It says, but all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know, both are before him. It is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As the good is, so is the sinner, and he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. All right, so let's stop there for just 1 second. So this is kind of an interesting section here, really talking about how that really just as the sun shines on all, the sun falls on all, is what it says earlier in Ecclesiastes. Also, death comes to all. That, it really is a thing, right? Of course, that the death rate is 100%. It is. It absolutely is. Whether you did good things in your life, whether you did bad things, whether you were a king and you lived in an ivory tower with a spoon in your mouth or a silver spoon in your mouth, or whether you were dirt poor and you struggled to find meals, whether you lived to be 6 months old, whether you lived to be 100 years old, right? It doesn't matter, because we all end up dying. And that's kind of the reality here. And what Solomon's going to really kind of unpack here is this concept of, well, that's just not fair, right? It's not fair that that the good also end up dying, that we all end up dying. Shouldn't it be a little bit different than that? Shouldn't the good people, shouldn't they be able to escape it? And the answer is ultimately no, for a couple reasons. So number one, because we are all sinners. And the book of Romans here says that the wages of sin is death. In fact, we see this in the garden when Adam and Eve are tempted, that their temptation was that they knew that if they eat the fruit of the tree, then they are surely going to die. Like they knew that. And they even said that to Satan. And Satan said, "Are you sure? Did God really say?" And then he straight up lies to him and just simply says, "Oh, no, you're not going to die. Nah, man, you're not going to die." And they did. Now, by the grace of God, they lived to be like, I forget what, like 700 or 800 years old or something like that, which I think about that. I'm in my 30s and I sleep wrong. And like I'm out of commission for 3 days. And so I don't know how they got to be like 750 years old. But I will say that by the grace of God, he allowed them to live that long. But where are Adam and Eve now? They're not here, right? And so that's just the deal, that they ate the fruit of the tree and Satan was wrong, God was right, that surely they did die. But also this whole concept of, so therefore I'm good, so therefore I get, it's not just, it's not good that we all die. Well, we do. And in fact, that's one of the things that we do, like especially I think of like Ash Wednesday, for example. We gather in this space and we have the ashes, and it reminds us that from dust we were formed. So if you recall Genesis 2:7, that God takes the dust from the ground and then he breathes the breath of life into it. Just as God did that, so too one day we too will return to dust. And that is just simply the reality. That is simply just, the consequence, the wages of sin. But of course, as Christians though, that we know that we don't all end up in the same place, right? That there are two places for eternity. And really that is what Ecclesiastes is about. Ecclesiastes really is about this whole thing. Ecclesiastes really is about this whole thing of that you got to really focus on what's important. Because, Satan, one of his methods of deception is to get us to be sidetracked and to, rather than focus on the things that are eternal, to think of the things that are temporal. And we had a study on Satan called The Great Deceiver we did at our men's retreat a couple weeks ago, and that was one of the whole things was that he creates us to be, or he tempts us rather to be busy or to be sidetracked. And as a result, if you really look at your schedule, and most of the things that we end up spending our time on are things that are not eternal. They are not. And that's one of Satan's tricks that he has in his bag here. And really part of the point of Ecclesiastes is to get us to refocus then back on the things that are eternal, the things that actually matter. All right, so I do have a question, and thank you for whomever it is to write in this question, but it simply said, so though Adam and Eve died, don't they live eternal in heaven? Yes, absolutely they do. And thanks for texting that in, because yes, and that is, you're right, I didn't say it immediately because I was eventually getting to the point that as Christians we have hope in Jesus and we have hope in eternal life, which is just something really cool. And so yes, we're be really excited to meet Adam and Eve in heaven. I'm sure that that they get very friendly greetings whenever they're up there. You're the one who's responsible for making childbirth more painful, for Adam. You're the one who makes our work harder down here on earth. So I'm sure they get lots of warm greetings up there. All right.
Create man and woman to not sin?
Yes, the question is, did God, for those on the stream, did God create men and women to originally not sin? Yeah, absolutely. So really, I marvel at the garden. And the cool thing about the end of the Bible, so that's the beginning, the very end of the Bible, the last chapter, Revelation 22, talks about how it is the garden again, about how it's God who gets to meet us face to face, about how it's that restored creation. So I'm excited. I'm in anticipation of heaven and just the restoration of the garden. But you're right, though. The original plan that God had was simply for there not to be any sin. That was his will. That's how he created it. It was paradise that he was walking. And the reason I mentioned God face to face is because he was walking with them in the cool of the day, and they were able to have that kind of relationship where they could look at God face to face, talk to him just like that. But since the fall, unfortunately, in the mode that we live in today, we are unable to do that just simply because he is holy and we are unholy. And that's why heaven is going to be the restoration of that. But it kind of does bring up a question, though, just tangent here for a second. Then why did he plant the tree in the garden? Because after all, come on, God, if you didn't plant the tree, then there'd be no sin, right? Yeah, but he did, and it's not that he brought sin into the world. He allowed the possibility of sin to come into the world, and the reason is because it's an out. It is a way to reject God, because think of it this way, that if God did not have, if we were created where we had no free will, we had no ability to reject God, then we would essentially be programmed. So just as one codes a robot, that if there's an inability to reject God, then we'd be forced into a relationship with him, and that would not be any sort of relationship. Yeah, go ahead, Judy.
Is the reason that we can't, the children of Israel couldn't face God. He was too magnificent for them to face. Is that because of sin?
Yes.
Because they could walk with him in the garden and they weren't, blinded by his holiness.
Adam and Eve were able to do that, right? But no one else was able to do that. Jacob did wrestle God, but even then, it is still a very different kind of relationship, that we have with God. And when we have our mediator is Jesus, and so therefore we are able to have access to God. But just that face-to-face relationship is going to be one that comes in Revelation, which I'm looking forward to. And just quick last thought on free will. So a few years ago, I used this example as in youth group because some of our kids are really just pressing me on this. Like, why did God put the tree in the garden? Why did he allow them to reject him and all this stuff? And so it was around Valentine's Day. And so I saw at Walgreens, like one of those teddy bears that whenever you squeeze it, you squeeze the middle, it says, "I love you." And so I bought one of those, and I used it as an example to say, like, hey guys, look, if we look at this teddy bear here, it has no choice but to only say, "I love you." Now, does this teddy bear really love you? And some of the kids were like, yes. And we're like, no. Hate to break it to you, and also the tooth fairy is not real. No, I don't say that. But really, it is the thing, though. It's like, I hate to break it to you, but this thing does not love you because it only has one option. It's only programmed to say that. And then I was hoping to be able to reuse it year after year when we teach on it, but we ended up playing a game that night, and I used that as our prop, and they just destroyed it. And so we no longer have that. So I have to reference it, but I can't actually show you guys because they totally destroyed that thing. All right, cool. Here we go. Here's another, follow-up here. It says, in your comment about people greeting Adam and Eve in heaven, with heaven being a perfect place, I wonder, will we question them about the fall? No, probably not. And I just say this tongue-in-cheek that they get the warm greeting, because also when we're in heaven, I'm sure we're going to be much more concerned about other things like worshiping God and doing all the cool stuff that you can do in heaven that you can't do here on earth. I'm sure that's going to be our focus as opposed to, and people even wonder that, like, will we be able to see, our relatives? Will we know who they are? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe. It'd be cool if we could, but also it's like, I don't think that's really going to be the thing you're most concerned about, when you're in heaven. But I don't know. Could be wrong. Never been there. But I know I will be at one point, and I can tell you all about it then. All right, so let's continue. Verse 3 here, it says, "This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. Also, the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that they go to the dead. But he who is joined with all the living has hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion, For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward. For the memory of them is forgotten. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. All right, so a lot said there, but a lot of kind of what we've talked about, the good and the evil, the sun shines on them all, so to speak, and in this case, also the wages of sin is death for us all. Any thoughts, any comments before we continue on to the next section there? All right, clear as mud. Let's continue. So let's go to verse 7 here. It says, go, eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. So if you're looking for some signs in your kitchen, all right, here it is, right? But really, go eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with a merry heart. And then it says this in verse 8, let your garments always be white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. And so the white, of course, being purity. And then in verse 9, enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because it is your portion in life and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. All right, so basically, this is just kind of an interesting section here, really just talking about how, God, we even read this in the Gospels in John 10:10, when Jesus is talking about how he's the good shepherd. He also says that he has come so that way we can have life and we can have it to its fullest. So really one of God's plans for your life is that you enjoy life. And so while we do need to focus on the things that are eternal, in the time being, however, he wants us to experience the joy and all the blessings that he abundantly provides for us. And so really, and there is kind of a thing within Christianity. Maybe it came out of the holiness movement, or maybe it kind of came out of, there's some ways within Catholicism that talks about how there's like a piety and poverty. And really, I hear some Christians talk about today, like, well, I'm not really supposed to, if I buy a new car, I'm not really supposed to, like, enjoy it. Now they would never say it that way, but that's kind of the way they live. Like, well, God only wants me to drive this kind of car, but not that kind of car, because that's excessive. And it's just like, no, there's nothing being pious, all right, in poverty necessarily, but rather that he has given you all these things for you to have joy with, to enjoy. And so really one of the things that Solomon mentions here in Ecclesiastes is, hey, eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with a merry heart, enjoy life with the wife whom you love, and just really just kind of talking up that, right? That hey, he's given you these things, enjoy them. Yeah, go ahead.
Holiness movement.
Oh, the holiness movement. Oh, okay, great. Okay, so holiness movement, we think of like John Wesley, that then became the Methodist Church, and within the Methodist Church in the holiness movement, it was like right around the end of the 1800s, mid 1800s, like in England, and then it really kind of came over to America. In fact, so the Methodists, they use that term method because they would describe there's methods of how to grow your faith. Now that makes a lot of sense if I say it like that, like obviously the more that you're in the Bible, the more that you're going to grow in your faith. But they also kind of rigidly spelled that out, if you will, some spiritual disciplines. And then they also called it holiness because there was also this thought that after you do these methods enough times, and then you are sanctified and you're growing in your faith, that eventually you get to a place that you're holy and that you stop sinning. Now, as Lutherans, Martin Luther used this term in Latin and German, and I won't be able to pronounce it, but basically in English it means saint and sinner at the same time. And so we're saint and sinners at the same time. So we're saint in the sense that we're saved and that we are redeemed as God's child, right? We're baptized, we're believers, we're saved. But even as someone who is saved, that we're never truly able to stop sinning. if that makes any sense. Well, of course it does. You experience it, all right? I do too. As hard as we try, and so it's not a thing that we shouldn't try, we should. We should try actively to root sin out of our lives and all that kind of stuff. But just by our human fallen nature that we're going to stumble, that we're going to sin. And so as a result, we're sin-centered at the same time. Holiness movement, however, had this idea of perfection. So sanctification was viewed as not only as a process, which is what we believe, but also that there was an end goal to that. There was an end game where you ended up being holy and unable to sin. And by and large, Methodists have gone away from that, mostly from what I understand. Does anyone here grew up Methodist? Do you guys know? I understand most of them have gone away from that. However, I do hear certain prominent Christian figures like Joyce Myers, for example, has talked about that. She had said publicly that she has stopped sinning. And so I say, you lied. Oh, look, there it is, But so there's a little bit of kind of remnants of that today, if you will. But the reason I mentioned the holiness movement, because there was also kind of this idea of piety being in not enjoying things that God has given us, but that, if we were to go, be peasants and move dirt around, that's somehow more holy than doing other things. And so that was kind of part of it. But yeah, good question. All right, yeah, go ahead.
One thing that helped me just in seeing God, because you get these thoughts in your heads anyway, because you're a sinner, but that God is good. And I heard the other day, Robert Morris said that when Moses asked to see God, he said, I'll let you see the backside. And it says, I have to go back and look at this scripture, but he said, it says there when God went by, put him in the cleft of the rock and he passed by, and he saw the goodness of God. And that, that's a real, he mentioned that was an attribute of God, his goodness. So everything in this world is good, it's of God. Satan has already corrupted some of it to try and tempt us or whatever, or become idols. But so if we can see things as from the goodness of God, like he said, that we can enjoy his goodness because he created this creation for good.
He did,
and he is good, so it reflects him. So just what you were saying made me think it stands to reason that we should enjoy what's good, not idolize it or make it our goal, but enjoy it.
Absolutely, fully agree, 100%. Enjoy what God has created. And really the created order, for me, I just marvel at it so much. Whenever you think about, how God has created the atmosphere and we have oxygen to breathe, and even things like with the rotation of the sun, that if we're like 1 degree too close to the sun, we'd all burn up. But if we're 1 degree too far, then we'd all freeze to death. God has really created this thing, the way that, the bees pollinate the flowers or something, but also human reproduction. All of it is just literally, I would say miraculous, but technically it's not a miracle, it's the created order. It's the way that God has made it to be. And I really do just kind of marvel at that. And going back to Saint Sinner, one thing I thought of is it is helpful to have that theology, to have that understanding of Saint Sinner. And the reason I mention that is because, so I grew up in a large Southern Baptist church in West Houston and out of suburb right there. And it was interesting, the guy who, I don't think he founded it, but he certainly was there for, I think, 15, 20 years, something like that. And he's the guy that was responsible for the growth of that church during the 80s and early 90s. And so my family had joined right around at the end of his time there. But it's kind of interesting that him being a pastor, he very much had this understanding of sanctification, I guess, that you can stop sinning, I guess, because he really struggled whenever he started to hear about how some of his church members, so you remember, you recognize that as a pastor, one of the things that you do is not just preach on Sundays, but you do a lot of counseling. And so he would have members who were good people, they would show up faithfully on Sunday mornings, they would read their Bibles, they are nice people, they get along with, And yet, here they are, and they're committing sins. They're out having affairs. They're, falling into temptation with addictions. And for him, he really struggled with that because he kept saying to himself, okay, how is it that we could have this elder who's in leadership cheat on his wife? Like, they do not compute. It does not make any sense. That here he is, he's growing in his faith. He says that Jesus is Lord, and yet he falls into temptation and he stumbles and he does something really horrific. How can that be? And as Lutherans, we have the answer. People who read the Bible have the answer. We say, well, Satan and sinner at the same time. For him, however, it really was a stumbling block on his faith. And so whenever he stepped down from being a pastor at this church, he has later gone on to denounce his faith and to actually say that he no longer believes in God. And it's kind of, and he's written a book about it. This is how I know about it, that he's written a book about how and why he no longer believes in God. And it's sad. It really is. But for him, if he could just understand that the reason why people do bad things like that has nothing to do with God, but rather it has to do with Satan. And Satan is you think he's going to work hard and whisper in the ears of Christians? Of course he is, because he's already got the other people. He doesn't need to work on them, but rather he's going to work hard on Christians. So of course he's going to work hard on that elder of your church. Of course. So this is why we need to pray for elders, right? Pray for our pastors, because Satan is always going to be whispering in their ears. And unfortunately, in this case, he was able to deceive and whisper into the ear of this pastor. Now this pastor is deceived in renouncing his faith, which is just really, really unfortunate. But I just think about that it's a helpful way of understanding it. You know what I mean? All right, so let's continue. Let's go on to, where do we stop at? So 9:10, so 9:11, is that correct? Okay, cool. Wisdom better than folly. So it says, again, I saw that under the sun, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to them all. For man does not know his time. Like fish that are taken in an evil net, and like birds that are caught in a snare, so the children of man are snared at an evil time when it suddenly falls upon them. All right, so I'm sure there's more on that, but let's just stop here for now because it's such a poignant thought, right? That we just simply do not know our time. It's absolutely unknown to us. And it is a thing where I actually do talk to people, and they'll even kind of almost say it so bluntly. They'll say things like, well, look, yeah, I'm a Christian right now, but I'm going to really start taking my faith seriously, whenever I get married and I settle down and I have kids. That's when I'm going to start taking my faith seriously. And I say, why? Because do you really know that you're going to get married and have kids? And even then, why? Why wait? But it is interesting. I talk to people and they say that kind of thing. And the reality is you do not know your time. I think there's always a reality of that. But even though there's always that reality, it's not always usually on our, on the front of our mind. But whenever we do pause and whenever there is a tragedy in our lives, it kind of brings up that thought, if that makes any sense. So one of the things that we've done here the past couple of weeks is that 2 Saturdays in a row we've had funerals here. And even so, one of them was an open casket. And, it's interesting because whenever you come in and you see that, there's just simply always this reality, right? That, oh yeah, like you always know it, right? But whenever you see it, there's just simply kind of this thought of like, oh yeah, that's right. In fact, that's one of the things we're going to be celebrating here in a couple of weeks. November 6th is All Saints Day, and we're really going to be celebrating that, and it's going to be kind of at the forefront of our mind. But really, we do not know our time, and I think about this too because there was a girl, a student who went here several years ago, and she was invited by a friend, and she stuck around for quite a bit. I mean, she came to youth group off and on throughout her high school years. She certainly went to the summer camp that we do. That's always just a really big outreach, and they do it really well out there in California, so she always went to that. And then she went to college, and, I just kind of lost touch with her, I guess. But it was interesting that here she was driving down 32nd Street with her, I'm going to get this wrong, but it was something like her boyfriend and her boyfriend's mom. And as they're driving down 32nd Street, behind them, however, is coming a guy who, ironically, she went to high school with, who went to Shadow. And here he is driving at like 100 some odd miles an hour. And he doesn't quite know that he's going 100 some odd miles an hour because his BAC level was 0.32. Not 0.032, but 0.32, which is kind of hard to do, but somehow he had achieved that and decided to get behind a wheel. And so here he's going like 100 some odd miles an hour down 32nd Street, ends up crashing into this girl who went to youth group here. And, you know, unfortunately the car just rocketed through a wall. And I believe, I'm going to get the facts wrong, but I think that out of the three, one did survive, but she did not. And it is just kind of a thing, like when I heard that, of course, you know, we're just floored. Because like, I mean, you know, if you could possibly imagine, you know, to chart out your life, right? For her, she had graduated from college. She, I believe, had just completed nursing school, was going to start her career. She has a serious boyfriend. She's likely going to get married. You know, if she had to chart out her life, she would do it that way. But unfortunately, that's just not how it goes sometimes. And you can just not predict it. And so for me, I just, you know, I think about these things sometimes. I guess it's because I'm in ministry and I'm just around it more or something. I don't know, but I do think about these things. So before we move on, are there any thoughts, any questions, any long-winded stories? No, that's only left up to me. Okay, I do the long-winded stories. Yeah, there's something, yeah. All right, well, I tell you what, let's continue then. And this is the same section, so I'm sure it'll comment more on it, but it says, I have also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. The words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. All right, so pretty interesting section here, isn't it? And apparently this was a real story that he's referencing here. But in this particular case, we have a great king is going to come in to siege a town, to take it over, to conquer it. But there was a guy who was very wise and was able to save this town because of wisdom. And so it's kind of like the pen is mightier than the sword kind of concept. But in this case, the guy just simply had an ability to negotiate and to see it a different way than everyone else did. And in this particular case, because he had that wisdom, he had that ability to discern in that way, that he was able to end up saving the town. And so just, you know, again, to fight, sometimes it's better to be wise than to have a sword. And that's Solomon's whole thing anyways. If you guys recall, if we go back to the beginning of his kingship, that was one of the things that he asked God for. He asked God for wisdom, a discerning heart. And in fact, we see this where he goes up to a high place, to a hill, to pray to God. And while he's up there, God meets him. And this is right at the beginning of his kingship. So you got to imagine, you know, right before he's going to start, he's got to be nervous. He's got to be sweating a little bit, or at least that's how I would be. I'd be super nervous about starting. You know, tomorrow is my first day on the job as king. What am I going to do? And so he's up there and he's praying to God. And while he's up there, God meets him. And God actually asks him, hey, what do you want? And so some people think that he asked God for wisdom, but it's kind of the opposite. God asked him, what do you want? And he responds and he says, I want wisdom. And what a great answer. Better than fame, better than money, better than whatever. But then we see later that because he was wise, he was successful. So he was able to get all those things anyways. And then we see right after that, that he's king, and we have these two women, and they each have babies, and one of them died, and he has this whole, because now he has wisdom, he's able to discern, and he says, oh, well, that's okay, we'll just chop the baby up and divide the baby in half, and of course, one of the women screamed, saying, no, don't do that. One of them said, yeah, sure, fine, kill the baby. And then obviously the answer is obvious as to who the real mom is. And so people really marveled at Solomon for his wisdom. And wisdom here just means a discerning heart, just the ability to decipher right from wrong. One thing is this, one thing is not that. And that's really what wisdom is. And so wisdom, in this particular case, which we're going to read more on in chapter 10 here, is simply that, the ability to recognize what is right, what is wrong. Any thoughts, any comments before we move on to chapter 10? Yeah, go right ahead.
Well, I kind of like how throughout Ecclesiastes, the theme is kind of how much wisdom is a double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it can be really good and useful, but also, Solomon keeps talking about, because he knows so much, it's just everything is useless and despair and everything like that. But this passage specifically, like 11 through 18, it's kind of a comfort, because people with knowledge and wisdom sometimes tend to be overlooked because they're not as flashy. But
Sure.
When it's really called upon, people with wisdom really, they do have a very important place in God's plan.
For sure. Yeah, well said. Yeah, and it's interesting, sometimes the wise are not as, they're not as loud, obnoxious, right, up front. But sometimes you see this, like, in some of the meetings that I'm in, there's like that one guy who talks all the time, and we're all kind of like, he's talking again, And then there's that one guy who rarely says stuff, but when he does, everyone's like, oh, yeah, that's a good idea, And that's part of wisdom too, that you're right, it's not always up front, but that's okay. And in fact, that's oftentimes better. And and in fact, so wisdom is, he's going to contrast wisdom and foolishness. And in fact, we go in here in chapter 10, that we're going to see that. And foolishness, by the way, is defined as not only one who makes bad choices, but it's always through like a spiritual lens, if that makes any sense. So it's going to be one who rejects God as foolishness. Yeah, go right ahead.
One Bible teacher said that Solomon asked for wisdom, but he asked for worldly wisdom, and he was given it, but he really didn't have a lot of spiritual wisdom.
Yeah.
Because he made some real big mistakes in his life.
Yeah, Solomon, we can learn from him. Or we should. I say we can and we should. Spiritual wisdom. Yeah. Well, because, so Solomon, he ended up with 700 wives and 300 concubines, which, if you ask me, that's a lot of women. My gosh. Yeah, like, there's no way he knew all their names, right? Number 734, where you at? But yeah, and that was the thing, that his heart, as a result, went away from God. And so Solomon, if you were to track his kingship, started out very strong. Asking for anything, he gets wisdom. He's able to discern and shows that with the baby. And then really his kingship starts out very strong, and they're able to do, as a country, a lot of really good things. He's able to then to build the temple, and is able to negotiate with Lebanon, and now they have Lebanon cedar, which everyone raves about, and all the gold and the splendor. And it's a thriving kingdom for several years. But because his heart went away from the Lord, and because and it wasn't just the number of women, although that is a ton of women, my gosh, but it was more so that these women were foreign women. And so they came in from the neighboring countries, and they would bring with them their idols and their gods. And you know how it went. It went like this, where he says, well, I know that we're not supposed to erect altars to Baal and to Asheroth and to these foreign gods. I know we're not supposed to do that. But man, she really wants to do it. And you know what? She's pretty good looking. So sure, babe, go ahead. Let's find that hill. You can put it there. It's no big deal. Look, we still have the temple, right? The temple's not going anywhere. We're still worshiping Yahweh, the true living God. But yeah, she wants to put her little idol up. That's fine. We'll let her do that. And over time, and also with the number of women that he brought in, the number of idols, that not only was his heart turned away from the Lord, but the nation of Israel, and this is leadership here, that as the leader's heart went, so did the nation. And so the nation of Israel then also ended up falling into this pattern where they too then rejected God. And then the punishment for all that was at the end of Solomon's kingdom, his kingship, that his sons, it was supposed to be a peaceful transition between, Jeroboam the first, right, and Rehoboam, and there ended up being that split then to Jeroboam and Rehoboam, and so yeah, his kingship, we should learn a lot from it. You're right, he did have that worldly wisdom, but spiritually by the end of his life, he was pretty bankrupt, which is too bad. Yeah, it really is. Go ahead.
Unequally yoked. It's, I think even when I was young, you'd be tempted to date somebody that was
Yeah.
not a Christian.
Right, but she's really good looking.
I've seen a lot of friends go that way, and then they got pulled away from the Lord.
Sure.
So it's very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest decisions you can make in your life, choose wisely. Absolutely. And it is interesting you talk about that because being in ministry here, I do see people who marry unequally yoked, and they always have such blind optimism to it in the beginning. And then you start to see as time goes on that no, God has this set up for a reason. Like he has this commandment in Scripture, not for no reason. Okay, he has it for a reason, and it always pans out the same way, or 99.9% of the time the same way. So yeah, it's interesting. Equally yoked. Yeah, good point on that. All right, well, let's continue into chapter 10 here. It says, dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart inclines him to do the right, inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. Even when the fool walks on the road, he lacks sense, and he says to everyone that he is a fool. If the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in low place. I have seen slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground like slaves. He who digs a pit will fall into it, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stones is hurt by them, and he who splits logs is endangered by them. If the iron is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength, but wisdom helps one succeed. If the serpent bites before it is charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. All right, we'll just pause here for a minute. So yeah, really just kind of contrasting, right, the folly, foolishness, and wisdom. And in fact, the book of Psalms, the first chapter defines wisdom, I think, in a pretty helpful way. So it talks about how there's three different types of people who are non-believers who I think even Psalms describe them as like evildoers, all right? People who don't walk with the Lord. Because it says, blessed is those who walk with the Lord, but then it goes to describe three different kinds of people who don't follow God. And the first one's the naive. So the naive, honestly, my heart goes out for them because they just simply don't know. I mean, why would you expect them to know? They don't know. And for me, like, it's so fun to have conversations with people, and I'm like telling them for the first time about Jesus, and it's because maybe they heard about Jesus on TV or social media or whatever, but to actually hear it and firsthand, oh, wow, that's really who Jesus is. Yeah. For me, it's so much fun to do that. Or even whatever it has to be. So that's gospel, or it could be law. People say, well, the Bible doesn't say this. And I say, well, yeah, it does. Oh, okay, well, it does. All right, I didn't know that. It's kind of fun to be able to do that, because the naive, ultimately, they just don't know. So there was, when I was in Oklahoma back in March for my grandma's funeral, there was an Uber, and the guy striking up conversation. What do you do for work? I work at a church, and he just simply was like, he had like all these questions. And so the whole time, we're just talking, and even so, it was so funny because he had just recently moved to the United States, and so this area that he had lived in apparently didn't have a huge Christian influence. So he was asking me all these questions, like, so at first I thought he was messing with me, like I thought he was trolling me, but I don't think so. I think he was really like genuinely asking these questions because he was like, I tell him, because he was like, well, Jesus, he's not around anymore, so he died. I said, well, yeah, he died on a cross. And he's like, wait, what's a cross? And I would tell him about it and be like, oh my gosh, he went through that? Yeah, he did. And I said, but it's okay, because 3 days later he rose from the grave. And he's like, what? A dead guy? He rose from the grave? And I was like, yeah. He's like, well, where'd he go? I was like, well, he ascended into heaven. And he's like, he what? We had to like talk through that. It was just really interesting. So the naive. So I love the naive because they just simply don't know. So they're naive. And the second thing here is that we have the fool. So the fool is someone who knows better but does it anyway. So I'm sure that you've been there where you're tempted to do something and you're even thinking in the back of your mind, like, I know I shouldn't do this, but you do it anyway, okay? That's the fool. And then we have the mocker or the scoffer. Now the scoffer takes the fool and goes one extra step, where the scoffer is one who not only does what is wrong, even though they know it's right, but then goes out of their way to ridicule those who do what's right. So the fool oftentimes will just allow them to, yeah, you go do your thing, I'll do my thing. But the scoffer then goes that extra step, and we've unfortunately seen that as well. And so for me, that's just kind of always a helpful way of understanding foolishness, is someone who knows what is right, but does what is wrong. And Solomon here just kind of outlines all the different ways that foolishness is done. that there's no benefit to it, really. Yeah, go right ahead.
It talks about the pit and everything. So you can do things wisely, or it can be kind of stupid and try and cut corners and stuff and get yourself in trouble. So there's a wise way, probably to split wood.
Oh, right.
Like wear your safety glasses or something.
Yep.
Or I'm just thinking that it kind of reminds you to take the extra step and do the better job.
Right. And sometimes that means that it's harder, so you got to do the right thing even when it's hard. So in this case, you got to actually go the extra step to sharpen the axe, right? Don't use a blunt axe or whatever the description was, right? If the iron is blunt, yeah. So you got to do the right thing, and that's extra work, but it's going to benefit you in the long run. Yeah, and we can all think about that, as wisdom and foolishness. And so, in fact, in verse 12 here, it says, the words of a wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is evil madness. A fool multiplies words, though no man knows what it is to be, and no one can know, and who can tell him what will be after him? The toil of a fool wearies him, for he does not know the way to the city. Woe to you, O land, when your king is a child, and your princes feast in the morning. Happy are you, O land, when your king is the son of the nobility, and your princes feast at the proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. Through sloth the roof sinks in, and through indolence the house leaks. Bread is made for laughter, and wine gladdens life, and money answers everything. Even in your thoughts do not curse the king, nor in your bedroom curse the rich, for a bird of the air will carry your voice, and some winged creature tell the matter. All right, so a lot of interesting nuggets there. Any thoughts or comments on that? Yeah, go right ahead.
Now that we have phones and you can get videotaped every time you say a word, you're going to be, you can have it come back on you. So
The internet never forgets. That's what I tell the kids. The internet never forgets. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, there's a lot of just really interesting things here. Kind of just, and this kind of reminds me of Proverbs. So Proverbs is written where it's not like in the Gospels, it's narrative. So it's written with like a flow and themes are weaved between. And then Proverbs is just kind of like a bunch of like bullet points, It's just kind of like little things that are just kind of thrown out. Like I always kind of imagine like, Solomon just kind of almost ADHD, just kind of like, and also, but let me tell you, and that's kind of the way that this is written here. It's kind of a whole bunch of thoughts. All right, well, let's go on to chapter 11 here. Then it says, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all, but let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes, but know that for these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart and put your pain away from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. All right, kind of interesting stuff here. For youth and the dawn of life are vanity. Why do you think that he's writing all that here? Kind of at the end of his life. Oh, yeah, I think they're invincible, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly part of it. Yeah, go ahead.
That part, you think you're going to live forever when you're young. It just doesn't seem, you don't worry too much about the end of your life. But
Yeah.
It just says, I don't know, that I thought it just kind of was talking about do things right when you're young because, that's when you have your youth and your vigor and your strength.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
And
that's part of it.
that's when you can learn.
Mm-hmm.
And the first part of the whole chapter is quoted by a lot of the people who do financial planning.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, well, cast your bread upon the waters for after many days you find it,
Mm-hmm.
and disperse your to 8 different places where you invest or whatever.
Right.
So it talks to me about being vigilant in your youth, being
Yeah.
wise in your decisions, and what would you say, delayed gratification?
Yeah, delayed gratification. Yeah, versus instant gratification.
And that
Yeah,
you're
certainly.
so you might as well, when you're strong and healthy and can work,
Yeah.
make your money.
Reap what you sow, yeah.
Be vigilant and don't be lazy, and don't wait till don't sleep in the morning and get your work
Yeah.
done. So.
That's great. Yeah, well
But
said.
it also speaks of risks that you take and the opportunities that are given in life. So there's risk, and if you take a risk, there's opportunities, or there's not any opportunities.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and speaking of, being, feeling like you're invincible and decisions you make, and doing what's right when you're young. So on our men's retreat, I had talked to one of the guys who is former Phoenix police, and he had said that he remembers very vividly several years ago that there was a guy who he put behind bars, and the guy is just talking to him and just kind of weeping a little bit and said, he said, 6 months ago, I had it all. 6 months ago, I had my wife and my kids, had a house, had a successful job, but he ended up, he didn't describe how or why, but he ended up with a drug addiction. And within 6 months, here he is. His wife left him, took the kids, kicked out of his house, got fired from his job, and now he's in a 10 by 10 cell, like 6 months. I mean, you talk about a plummet right there, holy cow. And but that's how it is. I mean, he started using, I guess, thinking that he's invincible, right? That there's no consequence for this. Nothing bad's going to ever happen, that I'll be happier. And really that is kind of the whole deal with deception in general, is that Satan, one of his tricks is that he always gives us this lie. So for Adam and Eve, the lie was that they will not surely die. But also today it's that the lie is that if you do this, then you're going to be more fulfilled. You're going to be happier in some way. And it's always a lie, because as soon as you engage in that behavior, you find out the destruction that comes with that sin. There's always a consequence. And so for some reason, I was thinking about that off and on since the men's retreat, about this guy whose life just completely plummeted, because of this addiction. And hopefully that was rock bottom for him. Hopefully he turned his life around. I don't know. We didn't really hear the conclusion of that story, but I just think about that from time to time for some reason. I mean, it's a pretty wild story. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Any other comments? Once again, long-winded, irrelevant stories. Okay. So Pastor Michael would be, yes, perfect. Thank you. Go ahead.
It's back in the last chapter, 10, verse 2. I have heard politicians quote that.
10:2, you heard politicians quote the Bible? Since when?
Yeah, I just got it.
Yeah. A wise man's heart inclines him to the right.
You wouldn't want to
Fool's heart to the left. Yeah, there you go. Well, all I'm saying is I cannot wait till November 9th. That's what I've been saying for a month now. Yeah, go ahead. The story of Bank of America? I've heard that it was originally called the Bank of Ireland, and then, Italy? Okay, I got that wrong. Yeah. Yeah.
There was a junk guy that had junk in his truck, and every day he'd come around and get the junk. And he had his truck that morning, and a fire happened. And the Bank of Italy's owner knew all the gold was in the bank, and they were looting the city. So he said to the guy, "If you get me out of here, I'll do whatever you want." And he said, "Give my son a job." And he said, "Okay." So they put the gold under the junk, and he got him out of the city. And so he gave his son a job. And this is a punchline, I forgot. So then his son, he went and did his menial job every day, and was a baker. But his son was able to go to college. There was a deal in there that somehow somebody was going to go to college. And then he was somebody that developed something for the astronauts or for the spaceships or something. He solved some problem. And I don't remember if it was for that or something. Some great problems. He was a great inventor, so he was somebody that really gave society something wonderful.
Interesting.
And he saved the Bank of Italy, which became later the Bank of America.
Huh?
But, unless you heard it a different way, and maybe it's got many different
No,
versions. I don't know, something like that. So
it's a
you
cool
can see
story.
there's someone who did his job every day, didn't worry about being poor, was wise in what he asked for.
And then it
Not for
became
money, but for
something.
for
Yeah.
his children and prosperity.
It's good.
Prosperity that could go on.
Cool.
So it's something like that. I don't know.
Cool story. I'll have to look it up. All right, so if you have yet to meet Mike Trinkline, you should do so here in a little bit. And also, Pastor Michael will be back next week. And let's go ahead and let's wrap up in prayer. Heavenly Father, God, we thank you for the book of Ecclesiastes here, and Solomon here writing this book about, just wisdom and what it means to be wise and to stay away from being foolish here. And we can easily recognize the destruction of foolishness and sin. And so we ask, Lord, that as we leave this place and we head on out, that we can think about these things, apply them to our lives, and ultimately, Lord, that we can begin to trust you in your wisdom. And all this we pray. Amen.